Yes, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, irrespective of the role the films themselves played, I mean, for me, it was an absolutely incredible experience because, as I said to you right at the beginning, I grew up in a little provincial town in Coventry. I didn't know anything about the world. And it certainly gave me uh, an understanding of imperialism, of the role of solidarity, of working class struggle in so many countries. And it gave me uh, a new sense of tolerance as well, because you learn the cultures of other countries. You learn how each country is different, the struggles are different. Um, but you also feel that sense of global solidarity, which I think today is more and more necessary. That despite people's different religions, different skin colours, whatever, that we all belong to this human family, and we should be supporting each other in the struggle for human dignity and for socialism. Um, so for me, yeah, I mean, just seeing the guerrilla struggles in Latin America and comrades and ex-student friends of mine who were killed there was incredibly traumatic. When I think, I had a rich life, a rich experience, and have survived it. They didn't. Their struggle was much more difficult. The struggle against capitalism, and one mustn't forget that, in countries like Germany today or Britain is relatively easy, unless you're really on the margins, which many people are. But okay, for you or me, we can live quite well. We can find a job. We get a pension. But in those countries, they were fighting for life, but at the end of it, they were also fighting imperialism, mainly America, and are still fighting against America. And we've seen Afghanistan, what's happened there. After 10 years of occupation, we're back to the Taliban again. And I think, yes, for me it was incredibly experience rich, and I learnt a lot, which I could have never learned that from books. I mean, you can learn a lot, but that first-hand experience, I think, is vitally important. Well, I think it lived up to that role to a considerable extent. I mean, I can't talk absolutely first-hand about the other socialist countries, but I don't think they certainly didn't have the breadth of coverage of world affairs and world events that we managed to do in the GDR. And I think it gave our GDR audience an understanding and a knowledge of events in the world which they wouldn't have had otherwise. I mean, for instance, like the whole series we made in Central America, Central and Latin America. I mean, we went to El Salvador in 1979 to show the dictatorship there and what it was doing, and how peasants were being just slaughtered on the streets, how students were being slaughtered. The rest of the world wasn't interested. I don't think anybody probably had never heard of El Salvador, and certainly wouldn't know where it was. And it was only when Archbishop Romero was assassinated in 1980 that the world media descended on Salvador like flies on a piece of rotten meat. They all came there and wanted to film about the assassination of Archbishop Romero, because it sent shockwaves through the Catholic Church, apart from the rest of the world. But then they just filmed and they left, with a few exceptions. There were some good reports. But we went back again and again. We were concerned about showing the process and what was happening in Salvador. And it was the same in Guatemala, Nicaragua, in Chile, and all these places. We were concerned about showing what a dictatorship meant for people, what liberation meant for these countries. And that was a form of GDR solidarity, in the sense that it was showing that, the GDR is interested in your country and your people. And I think that hopefully for a GDR audience as well was recognised, that they were proud in a way that, my country, the small GDR, is reporting about what's happening in Chile, or what's happening in the USA. Again, still today, a lot of the mainstream press, they'll give us reports of particular countries, like I've just mentioned Afghanistan, but they won't link that in to what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening to the whole anti-Islamic movement, George Bush's crusade. All these things are all linked in, and you don't get that sense. So I think that is vitally important for journalists. But I think for journalists today, the problem is that, you're never free as a journalist. You're not free from your own prejudices, and you're not free from the person who's paying you to do what you're doing. Whether it's the owner of the newspaper or the owner of the television channel, that is always in the back of your mind. It's got to be. Otherwise, if you lose your job, So you self-censor as well. Everybody does, whatever. But I think today journalists are less free than they've ever been, the professionally paid ones. The advantage is there are so many freelance journalists out there now, and so many small independent companies and filmmakers. That's a great enrichment. They hardly existed when I was working. And as I said, because there was no internet or anything, these days you can click on screen and you can be all over the world. In those days, of course, you couldn't. So that's why our work was even more important and significant at that time. Today, it wouldn't have that same significance. Well, as you say, at that time, the socialist countries thought they supported the liberation struggles with solidarity, and they hoped that these countries would become non-aligned or socialist. That was the idea, or after liberation they would start building a socialist country. Unfortunately, as we know, that didn't happen for all sorts of reasons. Mostly, part of the reason the GDR collapsed, amongst others, is that the pressures of imperialism were just too strong. And certainly, as I mentioned before, Mozambique, when it became independent, and Angola, the first thing they had to do was wage a guerrilla warfare, a civil war, against reactionaries who were being armed by the West to destroy the country. And so a lot of good cadres were killed in that struggle, but also it became a sort of war situation, so that it wasn't ideal for the unfolding of democracy and a democratic process. And then, of course, we had then the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc, and these countries, we can see that in South Africa. Nelson Mandela and the ANC certainly wanted to build socialism in South Africa. But with the collapse of the Soviet bloc, they realized, wait a minute, we can't do this. We've got no support anymore. And they were being lent on enormous pressure by the West. So they had to take back all their utopian ideas of what they could do, what they would be able to do. And they became just realistic politicians. And many then became corrupt. And it became, get rich quick. And that's why so many of the tragedies, so many of these revolutions have become dystopias. I think we have to learn very much from that process, because basically it's been a process that has been unsuccessful. And the whole discussion about how we build socialism, if ever, needs to be based on that experience. The experience of the GDR, which made mistakes in other areas, but also how do you build it in a world which is basically your enemy and determined to stop you achieving anything in the first place. Yes, there's no end. A revolution, if you like, is only the beginning of a process, and there'll be lots of step backwards before one can go forward again. Yes, it's not as well. Certainly, I thought at the time that it's progress in one direction, but it's not. The world doesn't work like that. Yeah.